You did provide examples of like specific technologies, the simulation, digitalization,
Mhm.
but what projects does this partnership hope to accelerate and bring to market?
Well, I think we're still working on that as this is very fresh, but I will say that in terms of materials development, our Detroit headquarters has been focused on metallic materials from day one. So over the last 10 years, we've been very focused on that. But we know from our partners at the Department of Defense and others that we need to explore other materials, particularly as we have been working very closely with the DoD in hypersonics materials development. People have heard hypersonics, things that go 6 or 7,000 plus miles an hour. How do we make those things that can go from point A to point B? And we might need some different materials to do that, particularly ceramics. So that might be the focus of our Florida activities, particularly with the Space Coast there, and with the work that goes on at Redstone Arsenal in Alabama, kind of being a central point there in the Panhandle. But that's part of the reason why we're having these conversations with manufacturers down there, is to learn from them. That's what we have in mind in terms of ceramics materials development. But what can we do to help with what you're already working on, or what you are thinking about, that we can help accelerate with the help of Florida Makes to move into the marketplace. So we have a vision. It doesn't mean we're 100% right, because we're going to take some of the input from the manufacturers down there and learn from them and see how we can best help.
So, how does Florida Makes plan to assist manufacturers with supply chain integration? And why would you feel that this step is crucial for the manufacturing sector, Kevin?
There's almost two questions in there, I think. Uh,
Let's tackle the first one. So, how do you plan to assist manufacturers with supply chain integration?
so one of the things that we put in place a couple of years back, it was actually on the heels of a hurricane down here, Irma, where the state suffered a great deal of disruption to our supply chain, and then in subsequent hurricanes, things like Michael, uh, they wiped out whole companies, and so we began to develop, with the assistance of the Department of Commerce, uh, a supplier capability database called CONNEX. And the idea there is for manufacturers in the state to sort of identify what their capabilities are, what their certification are, or what their work envelopes are, so that in the event of, a hurricane, as an example, that was the original thesis, and you lose a capability, you can pivot and find somebody that can do that same work, even if it's only temporary. Now, we thought that was a really neat idea, and NIST thought that was a really neat idea. And so we began developing that platform for Florida. And we based it on a platform for Utah. So we kind of copied a little bit of what Utah was doing. And then along comes COVID. And, now we have supply chain disasters, right? PPE, can't find parts for ventilators. My whole life has been bad timing, but this was a case of good timing where we had something in place that was able to be responsive. And just like the lift work, we had started out this platform focusing on mainly aerospace, that's whole Space Coast, commercial space. Quickly found ourselves dealing with medical devices. And how do we begin to categorize that? Because, we found companies and helped companies pivot from, producing cut and sew operations, producing athletic apparel, to all of a sudden producing masks and things that were needed. Aerospace precision machining companies all of a sudden producing parts that you couldn't get off the dock in Malaysia for ventilators. And so we developed this system, and COVID, I think, shined a great light on, oh boy, does the US have some supply chain problems, not just in semiconductors, which we all talk about, but pharmaceuticals and a lot of different areas. And so there was an investment made by NIST to enhance the supplier capabilities across the country. And so what we started in Florida, in partnership with the folks in Utah, became now 22 centers using Connex in 22 states. And then also across the system, there's capabilities on other platforms. But that's how we're tackling it. And you know, I joke about it. I was just speaking Florida Supply Chain Summit. That's the name of it. And I refer to it almost like an eHarmony. It's a matchmaking service. You got to get on there. It's not going to do anything automatic for you. You as a manufacturer have to get on. You have to populate it with all your information, but you have to be actively pursuing those connections. And where we see that happening, we're seeing many multiples, millions of economic impact. Companies that are utilizing the system are finding new markets, they're finding new suppliers. So that's kind of how we're approaching it. And our original approach was really to bring the Florida manufacturer into some of these bigger supply chains, you know, get them more involved. Often, you know, when somebody's looking for a supplier, they immediately go, well, you know, let me check in Indiana, let me check in Michigan, let me check in China. They don't check across the street in the industrial park to see that there's somebody there that can do that. So I'll give you an example. You know, there was a company down here that was dependent on two key suppliers, one in Russia, one in Ukraine. Now you can write the rest of that story. One was advanced composite materials. The other one was, you know, precision machining. And, you know, yeah, you know, there's precision machining shops here. So that was probably a cost issue. But they came to us and say, you know, we need to replace these suppliers almost immediately. Using a network like that, Connex, I encourage you to take a look at that. Using a network like that, we were able to find, in this case, you know, a machining company, probably not 30 miles away, that could do the same work. But there were some advanced composites processes that were involved in what they were doing. And we actually, through the network, found a replacement for that in Illinois. So that's the power of the network and what we're doing with supply chain. That's always been a challenge. You know, we have tons of capability in the country. Often we don't know who each other are. You just mentioned, you know, before the call started about the fact that you went to the show in Chicago. There are 89,000 people there. That's how you found people. But, you know, the world has to be able to look way past 89,000. And so that's kind of what we're doing with supply chain.
As a National Manufacturing Innovation Institute, I mean, that's really the third leg of our stool as well. So technology development, education, workforce development, and supply chains. Understand that we are connecting and convening with all of those suppliers that are critical to our defense industrial base, our manufacturing industrial base across the country, making sure we are connected with all of them and in our, you know, in our technology space, and the other institutes are doing the same in their technology space. Make sure that, as Kevin said, we know who the providers are that are across the street from us, that may be helpful or may have some secret sauce that might be helpful to drive some of these innovations forward. So supply chain is critical to us, just as to Florida Makes. And again, that's why this partnership makes so much sense.